Yesterday morning I picked up the phone with a smile, dressed in lavender, ready to celebrate the proudest day of my life, my granddaughter Emily's graduation. I asked her softly, "What time does the ceremony start, sweetheart?" Her reply sliced through me like ice water. "It's over, Nana. We didn't think you'd make it." In that moment, every sacrifice I had made, the tuition checks, the rent money, the car repair, the birthday gifts, the meals skipped so she could eat better, all of it collapsed into silence. I wasn't a guest at her graduation. I wasn't even family anymore. I was simply the woman who paid the bills. My dear friend, has anyone ever made you feel invisible at the very moment you thought you belonged most? Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, because this story will show you what happens when love is treated like a transaction, and how one grandmother finally decided to say, enough. I still remember the weight of that morning. The air was unusually bright for early June, sunlight spilling through my curtains like a promise of celebration. I had laid out my dress on the bed the night before, a soft lavender color with a pearl brooch I had been saving for a special occasion. Today was supposed to be that day, my granddaughter Emily's graduation. For weeks I had told my neighbors with pride, "My Emily is graduating and I'll be there to see her walk across that stage." I dialed Emily's number with trembling fingers, rehearsing what I would say. Maybe I would ask where the family was meeting or if she wanted me to bring flowers. When she answered, I expected the sweet voice of the little girl who once clutched my hand at school plays, who used to call me Nana, as if it were the most sacred word in the world. Instead, I heard a tone so flat, so unfamiliar, that I thought at first I had dialed the wrong number. "Emily," I began, my voice carrying all the warmth of my hope, "what time does graduation start? I'm already dressed. I don't want to be late." There was a pause on the line, the kind that stretches longer than it should. Then her answer came, sharp and merciless. "It's over, Nana. We didn't think you'd make it." First I thought she was joking. My breath caught in my chest and I forced a laugh. "Oh, you're teasing me. Where should I meet you?" "At the auditorium." But there was no laughter on the other end. Only silence, then a sigh so full of annoyance it cut deeper than any insult. "No, Nana. The ceremony's done. We didn't tell you because, well, we just thought it might be too much for you. It was small. Just close family." Close family. The words dripped like acid. Was I not family? For years I had paid tuition when scholarships fell short. When Emily's car broke down during her sophomore year, I wrote a check for $2,000 so she could get to class. Every birthday, every holiday, every urgent phone call that ended with, "Nana, can you help?" I had answered yes. Without hesitation. Without conditions. Now, the same girl who once wept in my lap when her high school boyfriend broke her heart was telling me that I wasn't even considered part of her close family. The phone felt suddenly heavy, as if it had turned into a brick in my hand. My throat went dry. I could hear voices and laughter in the background. Her mother, my daughter Claire, chatting with in-laws I barely knew. Champagne glasses clinking. The celebration I had imagined sharing was happening without me. I bought flowers," I whispered, though I knew she had already stopped listening. "Sorry, Nana. I've got to go. People are here. I'll call you later, okay?" The line went dead. I sat frozen in my chair, the bouquet of lilies wilting in the kitchen, the lavender dress mocking me from the bed. My heart pounded, but not with pride. It was with shame, with the cold realization that I had been erased from the story I helped finance. I thought about all the sacrifices. The nights I ate soup and crackers so I could send Emily extra money for her textbooks. The weekends I stayed home instead of traveling because Claire said Emily needed just a little more for rent this month. The countless times I reminded myself it's worth it. One day when she graduates, she'll look for me in the crowd and she'll know who stood behind her. But that day had come and gone. And I was not in the crowd. I was not in the photos. I was not even in the invitation list. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Instead, I stood up and walked to my closet. I touched the lavender dress, tracing the smooth fabric with trembling fingers. I had imagined Emily's face lighting up when she saw me in it. I had imagined her running into my arms, saying, "Nana, you made it." Instead, the dress would remain unworn, just another relic of my foolish hope. The minutes dragged like hours. I kept replaying her words in my head. "It's over. We didn't think you'd make it." The cruelty wasn't just in the exclusion. It was in the assumption, the dismissal, that I was too fragile, too unnecessary, too irrelevant to be part of her life's milestone. When Claire finally called me later that evening, her voice was cheerful, almost mocking. "Mom, I hope you're not upset. We thought it would be easier this way. Emily didn't want you to feel stressed with the crowd, you know. It was just immediate family." Immediate family. My blood boiled. I was immediate enough to pay tuition. Immediate enough to cover rent. Immediate enough to buy the dress Emily wore on that very stage. But when it came to standing by her side on the day she collected the diploma I had helped fund, I was a stranger. I didn't argue with Claire. I didn't beg for explanations. I simply said, "I see," and hung up. That night I sat alone in my kitchen, the lilies drooping in their vase. I thought of Robert, my late husband, and how proud he would have been to see Emily graduate. I imagined him shaking his head at me, asking why I kept pouring love and money into people who treated me like an ATM with legs. For the first time in years, I admitted the truth to myself. I was not valued. I was used. And as much as it broke my heart, I knew this was only the beginning of a storm I could no longer ignore. That night, after Emily's words still rang in my ears, I couldn't resist. I opened my laptop, typed her name into Facebook, and my stomach turned as the first images appeared. There it was, the graduation I was supposed to witness. The stage decorated with banners. The sea of caps thrown in the air. My granddaughter smiling proudly in her gown, clutching her diploma. But what cut deepest wasn't the smile. It was the people standing beside her. Claire, my own daughter, glowing with pride, her arm wrapped tightly around Emily's waist. Emily's father, who had barely paid a dime for her education, holding up a champagne glass. Even distant cousins from her father's side, people who hadn't lifted a finger for her in years, were there, laughing, hugging, immortalized in photos I would never be part of. Me. I was nowhere. Invisible. I scrolled further, hoping foolishly that maybe there was a single picture, a single mention. But the more I looked, the more it became clear. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had erased me. Every like, every comment, praised what a wonderful family Emily had. People wrote, "So proud of you, Emily. Your mom and dad must be over the moon." Not a single word about me. Not one acknowledgement that I had kept this girl afloat when scholarships ran out, when rent was overdue, when textbooks cost hundreds of dollars she didn't have. I leaned back in my chair, my heart hammering. The lavender dress I had laid out earlier still hung in my closet like a cruel joke. The bouquet of lilies on the counter had begun to droop, petals curling in on themselves, as if even the flowers knew they had been wasted. My mind drifted back to all the times I had been present, cheering louder than anyone else. Her middle school spelling bee where she stumbled on the word parliament, and I had hugged her anyway, whispering, "Nana's proud of you no matter what." Her high school choir concert when I was the only one clapping long after the audience stopped. I had been there for the rehearsals, the practices, the tears, the triumphs. So why not now? Why was I suddenly deemed too unimportant to sit in the audience of her biggest achievement? As the night deepened, I found myself replaying conversations with Claire. Subtle hints I had ignored. "Mom," she once said, "don't overexert yourself. These events are long, you know." Or Emily weeks earlier, "Nana, you don't have to worry about anything. Just relax. We'll handle the details." At the time I thought they were protecting me. Now I saw it for what it was. Exclusion disguised as concern. My tears finally came hot and unrelenting. But beneath the grief was something sharper, colder, bigger. I whispered aloud as though Robert, my late husband, were sitting across from me at the table. "They used me. They used me, Robert. And I let them." I began tallying in my head the things I had paid for, as if reciting them could justify the ache in my chest. 4 years of tuition shortfalls. Nearly $12,000. The car, $2,000. Rent help, another $6,000. Books, clothes, birthday trips. Easily $5,000 more. My back of the envelope total already approached $25,000. And that didn't even include the countless little emergencies. The concert tickets Emily had to have, the new laptop when her old one died, the endless gas money. $25,000. Enough to travel, to remodel my kitchen, to live comfortably. Money I had taken from my own retirement because I believed I was investing in love. But looking at those photos, I realized I had only been investing in an illusion. The next morning I woke up with swollen eyes and a hollow chest. I thought maybe Claire would call, maybe Emily would send a message. Something to acknowledge the hurt. But my phone remained silent, except for a notification. Claire had uploaded a new photo album titled, Emily's Big Day. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Instead, I walked to my closet and pulled out the lavender dress. I held it up against myself in the mirror. It fit perfectly. The pearl brooch glimmered softly. For a moment, I imagined walking into the auditorium, heads turning, Emily's face lighting up as she spotted me. But the fantasy dissolved, leaving only the reflection of an old woman clutching a dress no one wanted to see. I hung it back up, this time not as preparation but as surrender. Later that afternoon, I drove to the small park near my house. The same park where I used to push Emily on the swings, her laughter echoing like music. I sat on the same bench watching children run and play. And I asked myself the question I had been avoiding. When did my love stop being enough? The answer came slowly, painfully. It stopped being enough the moment money became easier to accept than affection. As long as I paid the bills, they tolerated me. The second I asked for something in return, something as simple as a seat at graduation, I became disposable. By the time I returned home, a strange calm had settled over me. Not peace exactly, but clarity. This wasn't just about a graduation. It was about a pattern years in the making. A pattern of being sidelined, dismissed, valued only for what I could provide. And for the first time, I began to wonder if I had the strength to end that pattern. The morning after scrolling through those cruel photographs, I brewed myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. 4 years, that table had been the command center of my sacrifices. I had written checks here, sealed envelopes for tuition, counted bills for rent transfers. I had balanced my own budget around other people's lives. This time, though, I spread out a different kind of paperwork. My old checkbooks, bank statements, crumpled receipts stuffed into envelopes I had kept out of habit. If Emily's graduation had taught me anything, it was that love, when measured in money, leaves a paper trail. I clicked open a ballpoint pen and began to write numbers down on a yellow notepad. My hand trembled, not from age but from anger. Tuition shortfalls. $3,000 here, $2,500 there, $1,200 at the start of sophomore year when scholarships didn't cover fees. 4 years added up to $12,000. The car, the blue sedan Emily drove proudly during college. I had paid the mechanic directly, $2,000. Rent assistance. $500 a month for nearly a year and a half when she moved off campus. That was $9,000. Textbooks and supplies, always too expensive for her budget. $100 here, $300 there. Over 4 years, it was at least $2,800. Extras. The winter coat she needed, the spring break trip she swore was educational, the new laptop after hers supposedly crashed. Those extras weren't small at all. Nearly $4,000. I stared at the total written in dark ink. $29,800. Almost $30,000. $30,000 that had flowed out of my pocket and into hers. $30,000 that had bought me nothing more than a closed door at her graduation. The number hit me harder than Emily's words. I had always told myself it wasn't about the money, that helping her was worth every penny. But the truth was laid bare. Money had become the language of our relationship, and I was the only one speaking it. I leaned back, pen dropping from my fingers, and let out a bitter laugh. $30,000. That was more than Robert and I had paid for our first house back in 1975. That was a year's worth of security in retirement. That was a dream trip across Europe I had postponed again and again, always telling myself, later. After Emily is settled. After she no longer needs me. But when exactly was that after supposed to arrive? I thought about Robert again. He had been so careful, so steady with money. Before he died, he had said to me, "Renata, make sure you save some for yourself. Don't give it all away." I had nodded back then, promising I would. But I had broken that promise, not to him but to myself. Because here I was, nearly 72 years old, with 30,000 less to my name, and nothing but humiliation in return. The coffee on the table had gone cold. My chest felt tight, but not from grief. From rage. Pure, unfiltered rage that pulsed with every heartbeat. I pulled the calculator closer, pressing the buttons with deliberate force. $29,800 wasn't just a number. It was proof. Proof that I had allowed myself to be drained dry while they toasted champagne without me. Proof that I had been complicit in my own erasure. For years I had soothed myself with the idea that giving meant loving. That as long as I opened my wallet I would remain indispensable. But the truth stared back at me from the notepad. I had paid dearly to be invisible. I sat in silence, staring at the sum. At first tears blurred my vision, but then a strange calm settled in. It was the calm of realization, the calm that comes when pain sharpens into clarity. I whispered aloud, almost daring the walls to disagree. Enough. No more. For the first time I let myself imagine a different future. What if I stopped? What if every dollar I had once poured into Emily's needs, I redirected into my own? I pictured trips I had never taken. A garden I had always wanted to expand. Even simple luxuries. A new pair of shoes not bought on clearance. A dinner out without calculating the bill in my head. It wasn't selfishness. It was survival. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Claire. Mom, Emily's planning a little party tonight with friends. Could you send her something for catering? Maybe $400. I laughed out loud. A bitter, almost hysterical laugh. The audacity. Hours after excluding me from graduation they were still asking for more. Did they think I would blindly comply as always? That my love could be summoned with a price tag? I typed a reply, simple and final. No. Not anymore. Then I turned my phone face down. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of something I hadn't felt in years. Power. As the afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen window, lighting up the yellow notepad with its damning total, I realized something profound. That number, $29,800, wasn't just a ledger of loss. It was a line in the sand. They thought they had erased me by excluding me from a graduation. But in truth they had awakened me. And when a woman like me wakes up after years of silence, she doesn't just open her eyes. She starts making plans. It was 3 days after the graduation fiasco when I heard the sound of multiple car doors slamming outside my house. My stomach sank before I even looked through the window. Claire's sedan was parked crookedly in the driveway, Emily's blue car beside it. And next to them, a sleek black vehicle I didn't recognize. Through the lace curtains I could see them heading up my walk. Claire walked briskly, Emily trailed behind, her face set in that mix of defiance and fake guilt I had come to know too well. But it was the third man, tall, gray-haired, carrying a leather briefcase, who made my blood run cold. They didn't ring the bell politely. They knocked, sharp and insistent, like they owned the place. For a moment I considered not answering. But then I thought of Robert's words, of the $30,000 scribbled in my notepad, and I knew hiding was no longer an option. I opened the door. Mom, Claire said, her tone honeyed but strained, we were worried about you. You haven't returned our calls. Behind her, Emily shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. The man in the suit stepped forward with an outstretched hand. Mrs. Richter, I'm Mr. Sanders, a family attorney. Your daughter and granddaughter have asked me to come speak with you about some concerns. I didn't shake his hand. Instead, I crossed my arms and said flatly, concerns? What concerns? They filed into my living room as though it were theirs. Claire perched on the sofa I had bought her 5 years earlier when her old one broke down. Emily flopped into the armchair with the careless entitlement of youth. Mr. Sanders set his briefcase on my coffee table without asking, and began to arrange papers. Mom, Claire began, clasping her hands as if she were at a church confessional, we're just worried. You've been making some unusual choices lately. Cutting off support, ignoring calls, refusing to attend family events. Family events? I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. You mean the graduation? The one I wasn't invited to? Emily flushed, her lips tightening. Nana, it wasn't like that. We thought it would be too much for you. Too much, I repeated slowly as though testing a foreign phrase. $30,000 wasn't too much. But sitting in a chair for 2 hours, that was. Silence. Mr. Sanders cleared his throat, eager to redirect. Mrs. Richter, please understand your family's only concern is your well-being. They've noticed changes in your behavior. Isolation, abrupt financial decisions, emotional distress. These can be signs at your age of declining capacity. There was the script. I had read about this. The quiet maneuver families make when they want control over an elder's money. Step 1. Paint her as unstable. Step 2. Insert themselves as guardians for her own good. I straightened my back. High capacity, I said evenly, is fine. My patience, however, is not. Claire leaned forward, her voice dropping into that patronizing register she always used when she wanted to manipulate me. Mom, don't be defensive. We just want to help. Mr. Sanders has drawn up a simple document, a power of attorney. It will allow us to manage things for you just temporarily until you're feeling more stable. Stable. The word made my jaw clench. I glanced at the stack of papers sliding across my coffee table like vipers. Emily finally spoke, her voice softer, almost pleading. Nana, we love you. But lately you've been so different. Installing cameras, refusing to pay rent, cutting us off. We're scared something's wrong. I stared at her, this girl I had raised with bedtime stories and warm meals, who had cried into my shoulder after her first heartbreak. Now she sat there, crocodile tears in her eyes, reciting a script designed to strip me of everything I owned. Emily, I said, my voice low but steady, what's wrong is that you used me. And when I finally said no, you decided to call it confusion. Her eyes hardened. The performance cracked. Nana, everything you have will be ours one day anyway. We're just trying to make sure it's used wisely. There was the naked truth. Not about concern, not about love. About inheritance. About entitlement. I reached across the table, picked up the folder Mr. Sanders had slid toward me, and without even opening it, dropped it straight into the trash bin beside my chair. The room froze. Claire gasped. Emily's mouth fell open. Mr. Sanders shifted uncomfortably in his seat. You've all made a mistake, I said quietly but firmly. You came here thinking the woman who paid your bills was weak. You thought you could scare me, corner me, make me sign away my freedom. But you're wrong. I am clearer now than I've been in years. And this house, this money, this life, they belong to me. Not you. Claire's mask slipped, frustration replacing fake sympathy. Mom, be reasonable. We've made commitments based on your support. Rent, car payments, credit cards. And that, I snapped, is your problem. Not mine. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Finally, Mr. Sanders stood, gathering his briefcase with forced dignity. Mrs. Richter, I'll respect your wishes for now. But please understand, if your family truly believes your decision-making is impaired, they do have legal options. Guardianship proceedings, for instance. A cold chill ran through me, but I didn't let it show. Then let them try, I said, standing tall. But next time they can spend their own money on lawyers. I pointed to the door. Out. All of you. Claire stood, her face red with fury. Emily glared at me with a mixture of anger and something that almost looked like fear. They filed out without another word, slamming the door behind them. I stood in the silence that followed, my chest heaving. My hands shook, but not from weakness. From adrenaline. For the first time in years I had told them no, and meant it. I walked to the trash can, picked up the folder and dropped it into the fireplace. The flames devoured the papers quickly, the edges curling into black ash. I watched until nothing remained. As the smoke rose, I whispered to Robert's memory, they won't win. Not this time. The battle had begun. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. My eyes were heavy, but not from sleep. From clarity. The confrontation in my living room replayed over and over in my head. Claire's false concern, Emily's crocodile tears, the lawyer's calm threat. Guardianship. The word had cut into me like a knife. I stood in front of the mirror, studying the woman who stared back. Wrinkles etched years of sacrifice into my skin. My eyes looked tired, yes, but they were not confused. They were sharp. I had seen through the charade. And I knew one thing with certainty. If they wanted a war, I couldn't fight it alone. So I dressed in my best navy suit, the one I usually saved for church, and drove to the office of Mr. Weber, a lawyer I had met years earlier when Robert's will was settled. I remembered him as patient, precise, and above all, honest. The receptionist raised her eyebrows when she saw me. Mrs. Richter, it's been a long time. Yes, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. And I need Mr. Weber. Urgently. Minutes later, I was sitting in his office, the smell of leather-bound books and polished wood oddly comforting. Mr. Weber, a man in his 60s with kind but piercing eyes, listened intently as I recounted everything. The graduation exclusion, the $30,000 in expenses, The confrontation with Claire and Emily, the lawyer they had brought into my living room. When I finished, his jaw was tight, his hands folded neatly on the desk. "Mrs. Richter," he said, "what you've described is not only cruel. It's potentially criminal. It's called elder financial abuse." The phrase made my skin prickle. Elder financial abuse. The words gave shape to the fog I had been drowning in. It wasn't me losing control. It was them trying to take it. Mr. Weber leaned forward. "The attempt to have you sign a power of attorney under pressure, combined with their history of financial dependence on you, paints a very clear picture. They're trying to strip you of your autonomy for their own gain. And if they pursue guardianship, it becomes even more dangerous. Do you understand?" I nodded slowly. Dangerous. That was exactly how it felt, like standing at the edge of a cliff with my own family ready to push. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He reached for a legal pad. "First, we document everything. Every transfer, every rent payment, every check, every so-called emergency. We'll build a timeline of the $30,000 you've given. That establishes a pattern of dependency. Second, we secure your assets. New bank accounts, new locks on your house, a security system. Third, we revise your will to ensure your wishes are ironclad. And fourth," here his eyes softened, "you build a support system. People who will testify to your clarity, your independence, your strength." For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. I felt protected. We spent 3 hours going through my records. I pulled out receipts, highlighted bank transfers, explained the context behind each. When we reached the final total, $29,800, rounded up to $30,000, Mr. Weber shook his head. "Mrs. Richter, you've essentially financed their lives for 3 years. That money could have secured your retirement, your health, even travel. Instead, it left you vulnerable. But we're going to turn that vulnerability into evidence." He handed me a folder. "Keep everything in here. Any message they send, any voicemail, any attempt to pressure you. Document it. This folder is your shield." As I left his office, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter. Not gone, but shared. Driving home, I noticed things I hadn't in years. The way the trees arched over the road, the cafe I used to visit with Robert, the small boutique with dresses in the window. For so long, my life had been reduced to errands for Claire and Emily. But now, possibilities stirred again. Back at home, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the yellow notepad with its damning total. But this time it didn't make me feel foolish. It made me feel armed. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Claire. "Mom, Emily feels terrible about yesterday. Can we come by tonight to talk? Maybe over dinner at your place." I stared at the words. The old me would have rushed to the store, bought groceries, prepared a meal, and hoped for reconciliation. But the new me saw it for what it was. Another performance, another chance to corner me. I didn't reply. Instead, I called the hardware store. "Mr. Summer," I said when the familiar voice answered, "I need the best locks you've got. And a recommendation for someone who installs security systems. As soon as possible." There was a pause, then a warm chuckle. "Mrs. Richter, I'll send my son Ethan tomorrow morning. You'll be safer than Fort Knox." When I hung up, I allowed myself a small smile. It was the first step of many. That evening, instead of cooking for others, I made myself a simple dinner. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, reminding myself that I was allowed to care for me. Afterward, I pulled the lavender dress from my closet, the one I had bought for the graduation, and slipped it back onto its hanger with deliberate care. It was no longer a symbol of rejection. It was a reminder. I still had milestones of my own to celebrate. Before bed, I sat with my journal, something I hadn't touched in years. I wrote one sentence across the page, bold and final. "I will not be erased." And as I closed the book, I realized this wasn't just an awakening. It was a declaration of war. The next afternoon, while Ethan and his father were measuring my doors for new locks, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. For a moment, I thought it might be one of the contractors calling, so I answered. "Hello." There was a pause, then a familiar voice, carefully softened into sweetness. "Nan, it's me, Emily. Please don't hang up." My hand tightened around the phone. I had blocked her number 2 nights earlier after the confrontation with Mr. Sanders, but clearly she had found another phone. My instinct told me to end the call, but a darker part of me wanted to hear what excuse she would spin this time. "I'm listening," I said flatly. She inhaled, then spoke with the practiced cadence of someone who had rehearsed their lines. I know graduation hurt you. It was a mistake, Nana. Mom and I should have handled it differently. We want to make it up to you. How about we cook dinner together, just the three of us at your house? Like old times. I almost laughed. Old times? Old times were me paying for groceries, me cooking while they sat in the living room, me footing the bill when the oven broke. Old times were chains disguised as traditions. Emily, I said, how much is the rent overdue? Silence. Then a nervous chuckle. What? Nana, this isn't about money. We miss you. How much? I pressed. Her voice dropped, the performance cracking. 2 months. $1,000. The landlord's threatening to evict us. Please, Nana. Just this once. There was. The truth, plain and simple. Not reconciliation. Not regret. Desperation. I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. $1,000. After 30,000 already gone. After being excluded from the one day that should have mattered most. Do you miss me, Emily? Or do you miss my wallet? I asked. Her breath caught. Both, she admitted in a whisper. We need your help. But we love you too. You're important to us. Important. The word stung because I had believed it once. I remembered her as a child drawing me pictures that said, I love you, Nana. I remembered Claire assuring me, Mom, Emily adores you. But where was that love when the invitations were mailed? Where was that love when they posed for photos without me? If I'm important, I said, my voice low but unshaking, why wasn't I important enough to sit in the audience? Why wasn't I important enough to get a phone call that didn't ask for money? When was the last time you called me just to ask how I was doing? The silence stretched long enough to become its own answer. Never. Emily, I said finally, I'll explain this once. For years, you and your mother treated me like an ATM with feelings. You ignored me when I had nothing to give, and you smothered me with false affection when you needed cash. That's not love. That's manipulation. And I'm finished. Nana, please. I cut her off. There is no please. You made your choice when you decided I wasn't special enough for your graduation. Now I'm making mine. Goodbye, Emily. I hung up and powered the phone completely off. For a moment I stood in the middle of my kitchen, my hands trembling. In the past, hanging up on her would have left me shaking with guilt, scrambling to call back, apologizing for being harsh. But this time the trembling wasn't from guilt. It was from exhilaration. Ethan poked his head into the kitchen, a drill in his hand. Everything okay, Mrs. Richter? I smiled faintly. Better than okay. Everything's finally starting to make sense. That afternoon, once the locks were changed and the cameras installed, I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I went to the beauty salon. Cynthia, my stylist, lit up when she saw me. Well, look who finally remembered us. Mrs. Richter, I thought you'd disappeared. I sat down in her chair, suddenly emotional. I didn't disappear. I forgot myself. She tilted her head. What do you mean? I've spent 3 years living for other people. Today I'm here for me. Her smile widened. Then let's give you the full treatment. As she worked, trimming, coloring, massaging, I felt layers of exhaustion peel away. For once, I wasn't thinking about rent due dates, overdue textbooks, or fabricated emergencies. I was thinking about me. About the woman who deserved to feel beautiful, who deserved care that wasn't conditional. When Cynthia held up the mirror at the end, I barely recognized myself. My hair shone, my nails were polished, my skin looked alive again. You look beautiful, she said softly. But more than that, you look free. Her words pierced me with truth. Free. That was exactly it. I walked out of the salon with a bounce in my step, feeling 10 years younger. People on the sidewalk glanced at me, not with pity but with recognition. Here was a woman who had remembered her worth. At home, I lit a candle, poured myself a glass of wine, and set the lavender dress back in its box. Not as a symbol of rejection anymore, but as a reminder. I no longer needed ceremonies to validate me. That night, I wrote again in my journal. Today, Emily begged for money. I said no. For the first time, no. And instead of guilt, I felt strength. Maybe this is what freedom feels like. I blew out the candle, climbed into bed, and fell asleep faster than I had in months. No restless tossing, no tears soaking the pillow. Just the quiet peace of a woman who had finally learned to hang up the phone. On lies, on manipulation, on the illusion that money could buy love. The next afternoon I was tending the small rose bushes in my front yard, something I hadn't done in years without rushing off to solve one of Emily or Claire's emergencies, when I noticed a shadow on my porch steps. An older woman, silver hair tucked neatly into a bun, sat with a mug in her hands. She looked up as I straightened. "Mrs. Richter?" she asked gently. "Yes," I replied, brushing soil from my gloves. "Can I help you?" She stood, extending the mug. "I'm Eleanor Brooks. I live just down the block. I know we've never properly spoken. Yesterday I heard quite a commotion at your house. Raised voices. I didn't want to pry, but I've been concerned. So I brought you some coffee." Her sincerity caught me off guard. Here was a stranger who showed more concern for me than my own family had in years. "That's very kind of you," I said softly. "Would you like to come in?" We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Claire's lawyer had spread papers, where Emily had begged for rent money, where my tears had fallen more times than I could count. Now for the first time there was warmth in the room. Eleanor cupped her mug and listened as I, almost against my will, began to speak. At first just fragments. Graduation, exclusion, $33,000 gone. But once the dam cracked, everything poured out. The rent transfers, the furniture, the lies, the humiliation. By the time I finished, my voice trembled, and my hands were clenched around my cup as if it were an anchor. Eleanor's eyes were glistening. "Mrs. Richter. Renata, if I may, you just described my life 5 years ago." I blinked. "You?" She nodded. "My daughter. Different details, same pattern. The phone calls only when bills were due. The guilt trips, the declarations that I was family only when they needed cash. And when I finally said no, the threats, the tears, even the lawyers." My breath caught. "And how did it end?" Eleanor sighed. "Badly at first. He cut me off completely. Told everyone I had lost my mind. I cried every night for months. But then something happened. Without my money, she was forced to grow up. Got a job. Stopped relying on others. And 6 months later she came back, not asking for money but to apologize. Now we have a real relationship. Not perfect but real. Built on respect, not obligation." Her words lit a fragile spark of hope in me. "Do you think Emily and Claire will ever?" "Maybe. Maybe not," she said honestly. "But that's no longer the point, Renata. Your responsibility isn't to guarantee their growth. It's to protect your own dignity." We sat in silence, sipping coffee, the weight of her truth filling the room. For so long I had believed my story was unique, a private shame. But here was living proof that I wasn't alone. That this wasn't some personal failure, but a pattern, repeated in countless homes where love had been confused with money. "Do you know what hurts the most?" I whispered. "It's not even the $33,000. It's realizing I never had the love I thought I did. That I bought affection but never received the real thing." Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "True love can't be purchased, Renata. If you had to pay for it, it was never real." Her words landed like balm on an open wound. We talked for another hour about gardens and recipes, about widowhood and survival, about the little joys that made life sweet despite betrayal. When she finally rose to leave, she said something that stayed with me. "Renata, loneliness surrounded by people who don't love you is worse than being alone in peace. At least when you're alone now, you're in good company, your own." That night I wrote in my journal again. "Today I met Eleanor. She reminded me that I am not broken, just free. She reminded me that the silence in this house is not emptiness but space. Space for new friendships, for truth, for a life that belongs to me." For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a discarded mother or a failed grandmother. I felt like a woman at the beginning of something new. The next morning I woke to the soft chime of the new security system. I looked at the screen. No intruders, no Claire, no Emily. Just the neighbor's cat wandering across my porch. I laughed out loud, a sound that felt strange on my tongue but deliciously unfamiliar. Freedom, I realized, wasn't loud. It was quiet. Like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. And I intended to breathe deeply for as long as I still had days left to count. The following week passed in a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. Mornings with coffee on my porch, afternoons with books or walks through the park, evenings spent journaling instead of waiting for the phone to ring. For once, the quiet didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like healing. One afternoon, Eleanor knocked at my door again. This time she wasn't alone. Behind her stood 3 other women, all around my age, carrying small trays of food and wearing expressions that told me they had already heard a little of my story. "Renata," Eleanor said warmly, "I'd like you to meet my friends from the garden club. This is Maria, Carmen, and Alfreda. We get together once a week. I thought you might like to join us." I hesitated. For so long, gatherings had meant obligations. Cooking, paying, smiling through humiliation. But these women's eyes were different. They weren't calculating what they could get from me. They were offering something. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. We sat around my table, plates of cookies and little sandwiches between us. The conversation started lightly. Recipes, gardening tips, stories about grandchildren. But soon, like water finding cracks, it flowed into deeper channels. Maria spoke first. "My brother treated me like his personal bank account for years. Every time he lost a job, every time his car broke down, it was my responsibility to fix it. When I finally said no, he didn't speak to me for months. It nearly broke me. But I realized, love that disappears when the money stops was never love at all." Carmen nodded vigorously. "For me, it was my daughter. She only visited when she needed money. When I stopped giving, she screamed that I was abandoning her. At first, I cried myself to sleep. But then I discovered she was perfectly capable of working extra shifts. She just didn't want to as long as I made life easy." Alfreda, the oldest among them at 80, leaned forward with steady eyes. "My grandchildren used to call me their retirement plan. They didn't even bother to hide it. They'd joke about what they'd do with my house after I was gone. I changed my will the next day. Sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to accept the truth of who people are." Their words sank into me like roots finding soil. For years I had believed my situation was some shameful failure, that I was alone in loving too much, giving too much, being discarded when the money slowed. But here were 4 women who had lived the same story in different forms. "You know what hurts me most?" I admitted. "It's not even losing the money. It's realizing I never had the love I thought I had. That I bought attention, but it was counterfeit all along." Alfreda's weathered hand covered mine. "Renata, true love never has a price tag. If you had to pay for it, it was never real. But here's the good news. You're not too old to start again. To find love that is real, whether it's friendship, community, or even just love for yourself." Tears blurred my vision, but they weren't the bitter tears of humiliation. They were cleansing, like a rainstorm washing years of dust from the windows of my soul. We toasted with coffee mugs, a small sisterhood of women who had endured and survived. In their company, I felt a strength I hadn't known in years. That night, as I locked my newly secured doors and checked the glowing screens of the cameras, I no longer felt like a frightened old woman guarding against her own family. I felt like a general preparing for battle, surrounded by loyal allies. Because I knew, Claire and Emily weren't done. The looks on their faces the last time we spoke, the lawyer's threats, the desperate calls, all of it told me they would escalate. And now, for the first time, I was ready. The next morning, Eleanor invited me to the garden club meeting at the community center. I almost declined out of old habits, obligations, excuses, the urge to stay home in case someone needed me. Then I realized, no one needed me. And that was a gift. So I went. The community center smelled faintly of coffee and soil. Tables were covered with potted plants and colorful catalogs. But what struck me most was the laughter, genuine, unforced, echoing off the walls. As Eleanor introduced me, women I'd never met welcomed me with open arms. Some hugged me. Some simply nodded with eyes that said, "We understand." I shared my story, shorter this time, without all the painful details. And heads nodded. Hands squeezed mine. No judgment, no pity. Just solidarity. One woman, a retired teacher named June, said quietly, "Renata, you have something many of us didn't. Documentation. Records. A lawyer already on your side. If they try to drag you into court, you're prepared. You're not just surviving. You're fighting back." Her words struck deep. For years I had been reactive, scrambling whenever Emily or Claire demanded something. But now I was ahead. They would come, I knew they would, but this time I would not be alone and I would not be unprepared. That evening back home, I sat at my desk and began organizing. I created folders labeled rent transfers, gifts, emergencies, furniture. I printed bank statements, receipts, and notes I had written after every call, every demand, every humiliation. By the time I finished, the stack of papers was thick, undeniable evidence of 3 years of financial and emotional exploitation. I looked at the neat pile and felt a surge of power. This wasn't just paperwork. This was my shield. And for the first time I realized, the battle ahead didn't scare me. It almost thrilled me. Because finally, after decades of bending, I had learned how to stand. It was a Thursday morning when the knock came. Sharp, deliberate, not the uncertain tapping of a neighbor or the light rap of a delivery boy. My stomach tightened. Through the new security camera screen I saw them. Claire in a tailored navy jacket, Emily beside her in black as though she were attending a funeral, and a man I didn't recognize, gray suit, briefcase, the polished smile of a professional accustomed to bending truth into weapons. I didn't open the door right away. I let them stand there for a full minute while I breathed deeply, summoning the steel I had been sharpening these past weeks. Then I unlocked the door but kept the chain fastened. "Yes?" I asked, voice steady. The man stepped forward. "Mrs. Richter? I'm Attorney Sanders, representing your daughter Claire and granddaughter Emily. We'd like to speak with you about some concerns regarding your well-being." "I have no concerns," I replied. "And I already have legal representation. Any discussions should go through him." Claire's eyes narrowed. "Mother, don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're worried about you. The paranoia, the sudden hostility, the way you've isolated yourself. It isn't normal. You need help." Help. That word again. Always coated in sugar, hiding the rusted blade underneath. "Help, Claire," I said. "You mean the kind that involves power of attorney and my bank accounts under your control?" Her mouth tightened. Emily spoke then, voice trembling in just the right places. Rehearsed tremors. "Nana, please. We only want what's best for you. You've been confused, making irrational decisions. Canceling transfers without warning, refusing to answer calls. That's not like you." I almost laughed. "Not like me." They had mistaken generosity for identity. They believed the woman who had sacrificed was the only version of me that existed. They were wrong. "You're right," I said, eyes locked on Emily's. "It's not like me. It's better." Sanders' smile thinned. "Mrs. Richter, my clients have already filed a petition in family court. They're seeking guardianship on the grounds that you may no longer be capable of managing your affairs. Today's visit is simply an attempt to resolve this amicably." The words hit me like stones. Guardianship. The polite legal term for stripping me of my autonomy, handing my life to the very people who had drained it dry. "I see," I said calmly. "Then this conversation is over. Any further contact will be through my attorney, Mr. Weber. Good day." I closed the door before they could answer, secured the locks, and leaned against the wood, my breath shaky but unbroken. My hands trembled, not with fear but with fury. Within minutes, I was on the phone with Mr. Weber. He listened silently, then said, "Renata, they've escalated exactly as I predicted. But don't panic. Guardianship cases are hard to win, especially when the elder is competent. You're competent. We have documentation, witnesses, and your evaluation with Dr. Moore. We'll fight this." I exhaled, tension loosening slightly. "They'll lie, Mr. Weber. They'll twist everything. They've already convinced neighbors and even my pharmacist once." "Let them lie," he said firmly. "Truth backed by evidence will cut sharper than their performance." That night I couldn't sleep. I paced the house, the weight of betrayal pressing on my chest. My own daughter, my granddaughter, willing to declare me insane for a checkbook. The lavender dress still sat in its box, the useless symbol of milestones denied. But now it looked less like a reminder of exclusion and more like armor. Proof that I had survived humiliation and could survive this too. The next day Eleanor came by with a casserole. When I told her about the guardianship filing, her eyes flashed with fire. "Renata, listen to me," she said, gripping my hand. "You're not alone. We'll testify. All of us. Maria, Carmen, Alfreda. We've seen your clarity, your strength. Let them try to paint you as incompetent. The truth will shout louder." Her faith buoyed me. For the first time I didn't feel like prey waiting to be hunted. I felt like a soldier sharpening her sword. Over the weekend I gathered my paperwork into neat binders. Transfers, receipts, notes of every humiliation. I even printed screenshots of Emily's desperate text messages. Proof that their concern was nothing more than financial panic. Each page I slipped into plastic sleeves was another brick in my fortress. By Monday, Mr. Weber had filed our response. He scheduled witness statements, lined up Dr. Moore, even contacted the pharmacist who admitted he'd been misled. We're building not just a defense, he told me, but a counterattack. They're not just greedy, Renata. They're guilty of elder financial abuse. If the judge sees it, this could turn back on them. The thought stirred something inside me, not just hope but resolve. If Claire and Emily wanted war, they would get one. But this time I would not fight with guilt or tears. I would fight with truth, evidence, and the unexpected power of a woman they had underestimated for too long. That evening, as I stood in my garden under the fading light, I whispered to the stars, "Robert, if you're watching, give me strength. Our daughter has chosen greed over love, but I won't let her destroy what's left of my life. Not while I can still fight." And for the first time in months, I didn't feel the sting of betrayal so sharply. I felt the spark of battle readiness. Because now it wasn't just about money. It was about dignity. About proving that a woman of 71 could still wield her voice like a sword. And I intended to cut deep. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and paper, the kind of scent that carried the weight of thousands of human dramas decided within its walls. I walked in wearing my best black suit, the one Robert had always said made me look impossible to ignore. At 71, my hands bore wrinkles and veins, but they didn't shake. Beside me, Mr. Weber carried 2 heavy binders, each stuffed with documentation. Every rent transfer, every receipt, every humiliating text message Claire and Emily had ever sent. Across the aisle, Claire sat rigid, her lips pressed into a thin line, her pearl earrings glinting under the fluorescent lights. Emily sat next to her, eyes downcast, but I knew that when the time came, she'd lift them and cry on command. Their lawyer, Sanders, radiated the smug calm of a man who thought he already had the victory in his pocket. When the judge entered, we all rose. Judge Miller, a tall man with a grave but fair expression. I had researched him with Mr. Weber. He was known for siding with truth, not theatrics. Still, my heart thudded in my chest like a drumbeat of memory. Every sacrifice, every transfer, every time I had chosen their comfort over my own. Sanders spoke first. "Your Honor, we are here today because Mrs. Renata Richter, though once a capable and generous woman, has recently displayed troubling behaviors. She has cut off all contact with her loving family, withdrawn financial support without reason, and installed excessive security systems due to paranoia. We believe she is no longer able to manage her affairs rationally, and we request guardianship for her protection." Loving family. The words burned. He called Emily to the stand first. My granddaughter, the same girl I had once rocked to sleep, whose ballet lessons I had paid for, whose braces I had covered, swore an oath, then turned her face into a portrait of wounded innocence. "Nana has changed," she said softly, voice trembling. "She used to be warm, generous. But now she shuts us out, accuses us of using her, even though we've only ever loved her. We're terrified she'll fall prey to strangers taking advantage of her confusion." Her tears were well-timed, falling just as she whispered, "She's like a second mom to me." My throat tightened, not from guilt but from fury at the performance. When Mr. Weber rose for cross-examination, his voice was calm but sharp as a scalpel. "Miss Richter, when was the last time you called your grandmother without asking for financial help?" Emily froze. I don't remember exact dates. So you can't give the court a single example?" Her eyes darted to Sanders. "We talked about lots of things." Mr. Weber pressed. "Yes or no? Was there ever a call that wasn't about money, rent, or bills?" Silence. He leaned closer. "Is it also true that you excluded your grandmother from your graduation ceremony while inviting your mother's side of the family?" Emily's face flushed. "It wasn't like that." "Is it true," Mr. Weber cut in, "that when your grandmother asked why she wasn't invited, you told her, and I quote, 'It's over. We didn't think you'd make it'?" Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Emily stammered. "Those words were taken out of context." "What context?" Weber asked coolly. "Makes telling your grandmother she's not special acceptable?" She had no answer. Next, Claire took the stand. She was calmer, colder, every word chosen like a polished stone. "My mother has always been generous," she began. "But generosity has turned into instability. She canceled transfers suddenly, ignored our calls, and even accused us of plotting against her. We fear she is declining mentally." Mr. Weber let her finish, then asked, Mrs. Sanders, do you currently have a full-time job? Claire hesitated. I'm between jobs right now. Yet for the last 3 years your mother paid your rent, bought your furniture, covered your emergencies? She wanted to help. And when she decided to stop, you brought a lawyer into her home and attempted to have her sign a power of attorney, correct? Claire's jaw tightened. We were trying to protect her. Protect her or protect your access to her bank account? Her silence was louder than words. Mr. Weber called our witnesses next. Mr. Green, the pharmacist, testified how he had been misled into signing a paper. Mr. Summer, the hardware store owner, confirmed I had come to change locks with full clarity and purpose. Eleanor and the Garden Club women spoke with eloquence about my sharp mind and new vitality. Then Dr. Moore, the psychologist, took the stand. She held up her evaluation and said firmly, Mrs. Richter's cognitive abilities are not only intact but above average for her age. Her memory, reasoning, and judgment are excellent. There is no medical basis for guardianship. Finally, it was my turn. My legs felt heavy as I approached the witness stand, but when I raised my hand and swore the oath, something within me steadied. Mr. Weber guided me gently. Mrs. Richter, can you tell the court why you decided to stop providing financial support to your daughter and granddaughter? I lifted my chin. Because I realized I was being used. $33,400 over 3 years. Rent, groceries, gifts, emergencies. Not one thank you that wasn't followed by another request. And when I asked about graduation, I was told I wasn't a special person. That's not love. That's exploitation. I saw Claire's face tighten, Emily's eyes drop. Do you regret your decision? Weber asked. I only regret that it took me so long to make it. I regret believing that money could buy me love. But I do not regret finally saying no. Sanders tried to rattle me in cross-examination. Mrs. Richter, isn't it true you've isolated yourself, cutting off family ties? I looked straight at him. I cut off abuse. I cut off manipulation. That isn't isolation. That's survival. He frowned. You installed cameras and locks, signs of paranoia. I smiled slightly. No signs of wisdom. When your own family breaks into your home with a lawyer to steal your papers, cameras aren't paranoia. They're protection. A murmur spread through the gallery. Even Judge Miller's expression softened. When the closing arguments ended, he left to deliberate. Those 2 hours felt like years. Claire whispered angrily to Sanders. Emily sat pale and trembling. I sat with Eleanor's hand over mine, steady as a rock. Finally, Judge Miller returned. He read slowly, clearly. After reviewing the evidence, it is the decision of this court that Mrs. Renata Richter is in full possession of her mental faculties. The request for guardianship is denied. Furthermore, the evidence suggests attempts of financial exploitation by the petitioners. This matter may warrant further legal investigation. The gavel struck. It was done. Gasps, whispers, the shuffling of papers. Claire's face went white. Emily bit her lip until it bled. Sanders collected his files with stiff efficiency. I stood, my knees steady, my voice clear. Your Honor, thank you. Today you didn't just protect my money. You protected my dignity. As I left the courtroom, the weight of decades seemed to lift from my shoulders. Eleanor whispered, You did it, Renata. You won. But as I stepped into the sunlight, I realized something even greater. I hadn't just won a trial. I had won myself back. The days after the court ruling felt different. The air seemed lighter, the sunlight warmer. For the first time in years, I woke up without a knot of dread in my stomach. No phone vibrating with demands, no threats disguised as help, no feeling that my life belonged to someone else. The morning after the trial, I brewed my coffee and stood on the porch. The roses glistened with dew, and for once I let myself linger, savoring the simple beauty. I thought of Robert and how he would have smiled to see me standing tall, victorious, no longer bowed beneath obligation. Claire and Emily did not call. They did not show up at my door. Perhaps their lawyer had warned them further attempts could bring criminal charges. Perhaps they were too humiliated. Either way, the silence was glorious. I decided to celebrate. Not with an expensive dinner or gifts for others, but with something just for me. I booked a short trip. A weekend in the coastal town Robert and I had once dreamed of visiting. The ocean air, the salt on my lips, the crash of waves against the pier. It reminded me that the world was still vast, still waiting, and I had been living in a cage of guilt too long. When I returned, Eleanor and the garden club women threw me a small gathering. Balloons, flowers, laughter, but no one asked me for money. No one calculated what they could take. They offered hugs, stories, music. For the first time I felt what real family could be, chosen, not forced. That evening I sat at my kitchen table, pen in hand, and drafted a new will. Mr. Weber helped me file it later that week. No more blank inheritance for Claire and Emily. Instead, my estate would be divided between charitable organizations protecting elders from financial abuse, and a trust to support local scholarships. If my own bloodline saw me as nothing but a wallet, then my legacy would go to those who valued life, not greed. It was not vengeance. It was justice. A few days later, a letter arrived. Handwritten, shaky. From Emily. Nana, I don't understand why you hate us now. We made mistakes, but we're still family. I need you. Please forgive me. I read it once, twice. For years, those words, I need you, would have been enough to melt my resolve. But now they rang hollow. Because her definition of need was never about love, but about survival at my expense. I folded the letter, placed it in a box with old receipts and photographs, and wrote one word on the lid. Finished. Because that's what it was. Finished. Instead of writing back, I called Diana in Chicago. My sister's voice was warm, excited. Renata, you sound like yourself again. I am myself again, I told her. And I want to visit. It's been too long. She laughed. The guest room is waiting. No transfers required. I chuckled with her, a sound that felt like spring after a long winter. Over the next weeks, my days blossomed with color. I painted again, bright strokes of lavender and gold across canvas. I joined Eleanor in planting a community garden, where children ran between rows of tomatoes and sunflowers. I even signed up for a local art class, where women decades younger admired my determination to start anew. At night, I no longer lay awake rehearsing apologies I never owed. I slept soundly, dreaming not of fear but of possibilities. One evening, as the garden club sat under the pergola, sipping lemonade, Alfreda turned to me. Renata, do you realize what you've done? You've proven to yourself and to all of us that freedom is possible at any age. That dignity is worth more than family ties that strangle. Her words made me smile. I only wish I'd learned it sooner. Maybe, she said. But maybe you had to live through it to understand the strength you carry now. Later, as the stars glittered above, I thought back to the woman I had been a year ago. Trembling, apologizing, handing over dollar after dollar for the illusion of love. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone finally free. I knew Claire and Emily might try again someday. Greed rarely sleeps long. But now I had armor. Legal protection, loyal friends, an unshakable sense of self. And if they ever returned, they would no longer find the pliant mother or doting grandmother they once exploited. They would find a woman who had learned that the greatest act of love is not for others, but for oneself. As I blew out the candle on my porch that night, I whispered, I am free, Robert. Truly free. And for the first time in decades, I believed it. I sat on my balcony that final evening, the city lights glittering like stars scattered across the earth. In my lap rested the lavender dress, folded carefully, no longer a symbol of humiliation but of transformation. I had survived the cruelty of exclusion, the sting of betrayal, the brutal fight in court. And more importantly, I had survived myself. The version of me who believed that love could be purchased, that dignity could be bargained away for the fleeting warmth of false affection. I looked at the night sky and thought of Robert. "My love," I whispered, "I made it through. I lost pieces of my heart along the way, but I found something more valuable. I found myself again." The air carried a quiet peace I hadn't felt in decades. No phone buzzing with demands. No lawyers at my table. No tears staining the pillow because I wasn't special enough. Only silence. The silence of freedom, the silence of finally being whole. And it struck me that this story wasn't just mine. It belonged to every woman who had ever been told she wasn't enough unless she gave more. To every mother or grandmother who sacrificed her own happiness only to be discarded. We are taught to give, to endure, to put ourselves last. But sometimes the bravest act of love is to say no. Because no is not rejection. No is protection. If you are listening to me now, my dear child, perhaps you've lived something similar. Perhaps you know the pain of being excluded, the humiliation of realizing your worth was measured only in dollars, not in love. Or perhaps you fear it could happen one day. I want you to know this. You are not alone. And you are not powerless. I thought the fight would break me. Instead, it remade me. And if it happened to me at 71, it can happen for you too, no matter your age. Tonight, I close this chapter of my life with gratitude. Gratitude for Eleanor, for the Garden Club women, for the judge who saw the truth, for the sister who reminded me I was worth more than money. And most of all, gratitude for the woman in the mirror who finally chose herself. So now, I turn to you, the one hearing my story. What would you have done in my place? Would you have kept sacrificing in the hope of earning love? Or would you have found the strength to break free sooner? I would love to hear your thoughts, your experiences, your wisdom. Please share them with me in the comments. Your words may give strength to another soul walking through the same shadows I once did. And tell me where you are listening from. I always love knowing how far these stories travel. From New York to London, from Toronto to Manila, from small villages to bustling cities. We are connected by the invisible threads of shared experience, bound not by blood but by understanding. If my story touched you, if you saw a reflection of your own struggles or victories, I invite you to stay with me. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the many other stories waiting to be told. Stories of betrayal and survival, of heartbreak and resilience, of women and men who discovered that dignity is worth more than inheritance, more than approval, more than even family bonds when they turn toxic. Because here, every story is not just entertainment. It's a reminder, a warning, a spark of courage for someone who might be silently suffering right now. As I fold the lavender dress one final time and place it gently back into its box, I know it no longer represents what I lost. It represents what I gained: clarity, peace, and freedom. My name is Renata Richter. I am 72 years old. And I have finally learned that the most important person I must love and protect is myself. Thank you for listening. Thank you for walking with me through my journey. Until next time, take care of yourself, hold on to your dignity, and never forget, true love never has a price and freedom is never too expensive. With heartfelt greetings, Renata.